you, Al.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, it's time for our final talk of the session. So Shanae Arts, and she's going to talk about cortical physiology as a therapeutic target in Parkinson's disease related with mild cognitive impairment.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, my name is Shanae Arts, and I'm going to be talking to you about MCI, mild cognitive impairment in Parkinson's disease. So what is Parkinson's disease? I'm going to be abbreviating it PD. So James Parkinson is the first person to write about Parkinson's disease. He wrote an essay in 1817 called The Shaking Palsy. And it's quoted in there that it says, the senses and intellect are uninjured. And so what that means is that PD is primarily thought to be a motor disease. And so it's characterized by tremor, which is usually on one side of the body, and it's a resting tremor. And then there's postural instability, which is problems walking, stiffness, and bradykinesia, which is slowed movement. And Parkinson's disease affects about 1 to 2% of people over the age of 65. So that means about 1 million Americans. Well, it turns out that the senses are not uninjured, the intellect is not uninjured, and in fact, many PD patients experience cognitive symptoms. So our focus in this study is mild cognitive impairment in PD. Cognitive symptoms have a greater impact on patient suffering and caregiver burden than motor symptoms, and actually the cognitive symptoms are the leading cause of nursing home placement. So I'm going to explain to you the differences between normal aging, MCI, and dementia. So normal aging, around the age of 25, most people experience a decline in their memory, in their working memory and their ability to multitask, and that's normal. Then there's MCI, and that means that they have problems with thinking and memory that are worse than what is normal for their age. And about 1/3 of PD patients have MCI at the time of their diagnosis. And then there's dementia. And dementia is problems with thinking and memory that are so severe that the patient is no longer able to do things that are required for daily life. So what that means is they can't drive safely, they forget to pay their bills, they can't remember to pay their bills on time, they have problems taking their medications properly, and so it's more severe. And about 75% of PD patients will develop dementia over time, so more than half. And the pathophysiology of cognitive dysfunction in PD is poorly understood. And what that phrase means is the underlying brain mechanisms of this cognitive dysfunction is not understood by the scientific community. And I just wanted to point out that I'm going to be using the term cognitive dysfunction interchangeably throughout the talk with the phrase problems with thinking and memory, and they mean the same thing. So our standard medical procedures and surgical treatments that we use in PD, that'd be DBS, deep brain stimulation is the surgical treatment, and levodopa is the common PD medicinal treatment. Those have minimal effects on cognitive dysfunction, and in fact, DBS can actually worsen cognitive dysfunction. So we're really in search of a treatment. So this is a little bit about the evolution of Parkinson's disease. So there's the preclinical phase, which can be as far back as 10 years before their diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. A lot of patients will report olfactory loss, and what that means is the loss of a sense of smell. Anxiety and depression is very common as well. And at the time of diagnosis, it usually occurs because of their motor symptoms. So as I mentioned, the resting tremor, the bradykinesia, and rigidity. And then about 5 to 10 years after their initial diagnosis, they start experiencing advanced PD symptoms. And that is increased problems with walking, a lot of falls occur, and then the cognitive decline and dementia, which is what we're interested in. So the major areas of thinking and memory affected by PD. There's executive functioning, and that's someone's ability to multitask and their reaction time. And then there's language. So a PD patient might have problems finding the correct word, they're less fluent. And then memory. So PD patients have problems retrieving memories that have been stored in the brain. And this is in contrast to Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's patients have problems storing the memory in the brain. And Parkinson's patients can store the memory in the brain, but they have problems retrieving it. So So we're looking for a treatment for these cognitive symptoms, and our treatment of interest is called repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, abbreviated RTMS. This is non-invasive, meaning that it's not surgical. It utilizes rapid magnetic pulses applied over the scalp with a small handheld coil. And so there's a magnetic pulse sent into the brain which causes an electrical signal on our particular area of interest. And in this study, we utilize high frequency, which is 20 hertz, a train of pulses, which is why it's called repetitive, and it's followed by a 30-second rest period, and that was 12 minutes on each side of the brain. So what does TMS look like? Well, here's an example. This is my mentor, Dr. Kluger, and he's performing TMS on a study subject. So he has the coil, and he has it over the scalp on a particular area of interest. And so that's sending a magnetic pulse into the brain, causing the brain to fire. And what the researcher is looking at on the computer screen while he's doing this is this software called BrainSight. And so this is actually my MRI. I received a TMS treatment, which was pretty cool. And so they used my MRI to localize the area of interest. And so you can see right here, this would be my head, and this is the area we're interested in. And then this means it's on target. And so this red dot will move around, and then when you get it in the right spot, that's when you send the magnetic pulse. So what is that target of interest? Well, our target of interest is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. You can see where it is on the brain here, and it's abbreviated the DLPFC. So dorsal means above, like at the dorsal fin on a dolphin. Lateral means on the sides. Prefrontal is a part of the brain which is in the front. And then the cortex means the outer part of the brain. So there's the subcortical part, and then there's the cortex. And so we're treating the cortex. So previous studies in TMS and problems with thinking and memory. Well, TMS was shown to be useful in treating these problems with thinking and memory in healthy older adults. And by healthy, we just mean that they had no neurological disease. TMS was also useful in treating cognitive dysfunction in Alzheimer's patients. And TMS has actually been approved by the FDA, which takes a long time, as a treatment for depression. So our objectives. We want to understand the underlying brain mechanisms of cognitive dysfunction in PD. We want to see if TMS works as a treatment for MCI and PD. And since TMS has been shown to improve thinking and memory in Alzheimer's and healthy older adults, we hypothesize that TMS will improve thinking and memory in Parkinson's disease. So our study subjects all had a diagnosis of PD. And again, that's diagnosed using the UK Brain Bank criteria, which is muscular rigidity, the 4 to 6 hertz resting tremor, and postural instability. They were all over the age of 40. They all had a diagnosis of MCI, and they had no unstable medical condition. We also excluded subjects with depression. They took a questionnaire called the HADS, and if they had a score of 11 or higher, they were excluded from the study. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned before, TMS isn't a treatment for depression. And when people's depression gets better, their cognition gets better. And so we wanted to make sure that if we saw an improvement in cognition, that this wasn't because we were treating the depression, but rather because TMS improves cognition. So we excluded the depressed patients. So we had a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. So the placebo-controlled part means that we had a sham TMS. And so there was no actual magnetic effects. We had a sham coil. It looked really similar. And then we also placed an electrode on the part of the brain that's being stimulated, and that simulates the sensation that you feel during the real TMS treatment. And then it's double-blind because the study subject was unaware if they were receiving the sham or the real, and also the researcher analyzing the data, which is me and my colleagues, was unaware if the subject was receiving sham or real. So we're interested in 3 time points. So there's baseline before any TMS treatment, there's post-TMS, which is after the final treatment, and then there's washout, which is 28 days after the final treatment. So here's a schedule of procedures just to help you guys understand what we did. Before any TMS treatment, They underwent 2 different types of brain scans. That's an MRI and an MEG. They also underwent neuropsychological testing to get their baseline cognition. Over the next 2 weeks, they received 10 sessions of TMS. After the 10th session, they had another MEG, another battery of neuropsych testing, and of course they had their final TMS. And then 28 days after their final TMS, we did one more round of neuropsych testing, and that was just to see if the effects of TMS were long-lasting. So, a little bit more about neuropsych testing so everyone understands. We had about 20 tests, and like I said, it determined the subject's level of cognitive functioning. These are standardized tests, and our primary outcome measure was the MADRS Dementia Rating Scale, the MDRS, and we also had a measure of disease severity, which is the UPDRS. So does TMS improve cognitive dysfunction in PD-related MCI? We use neuropsych testing to quantify what it meant to have improved thinking and memory, and we did statistical modeling, repeated measures, ANOVA specifically. And we also utilized brain scans to determine which areas of the brain are changed after a TMS treatment. So far we have 42 subjects, 32 of which are male, which is typical for the PD population. A MOCA, which is a common clinical scoring for cognitive dysfunction. Their baseline score was 24.57. The high that you can get on that is a 30, so they qualified as MCI. And then they were randomized. So there were 21 who received real TMS, and there were 21 who got placebo TMS. Preliminary analysis of the MEG brain scans has shown that TMS does affect how the brain is wired. And our statistical analysis is currently being done. So we're comparing baseline, that's before any treatment, and post-TMS, after all 10 treatments. We're also comparing sham, which is the fake TMS treatment, with the real TMS treatment. And it turns out there's no change in our primary outcome measure. And so here is a table to summarize that for you. These are the mean scores on this questionnaire. And so the real RTMS and the sham TMS are separated, and then the time points before any treatment and after all the treatments are separated. And if you glance at the total scores here, there's no significant difference from before they received a treatment and after they received a treatment. So what does that mean? Well, TMS does not appear to be an effective treatment for MCI in the PD population. And so one of our guesses for the cause of this is because, as I mentioned before, we're treating the cortex of the brain, the DLPFC. And if the cause of MCI and PD is subcortical, then we're not accessing it with TMS. And that's a possibility. But the brain scans have shown some changes in network connectivity. And so we are going to delve further into that as the study continues. I mentioned other studies that had positive results with TMS and cognitive dysfunction. Some notes to talk about with those studies is that they had an insufficient sham TMS treatment, and so they had no electrode that was mimicking the sensation of TMS, and that might have changed their results. They had no primary outcome measure, and so they were kind of shooting in the dark and found something. And then also some of those studies are funded by the TMS manufacturers, and so they had a vested interest in it being a positive result. So in the future, we hope to target different areas of the brain or use a different frequency of TMS. Here's my references. Thank you to my mentors. And questions?
Questions for Shanae?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you. That was a really interesting talk.
Good.
So I actually personally had some experience with TMS involved in the depression and anxiety insomnia study earlier, like 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, during your research, do your patients experience any side effects from any of the treatment?
Typically not. The biggest complaint is kind of makes your face jolt, and so some of the elderly patients can be really sensitive to that. I think we had 1 or 2 complain of headaches, but it's pretty rare that there's any severe side effects. Did you guys experience side effects?
Yeah, but we're using much higher frequency We did the Fourier transform. Did you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.